Hello, and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we are following Jonathan Riddell,
Hello, hello.
choreographer and artistic director of Riddell Dance Theater, as he creates his latest works for RDT's Second Story Dance project and delves into new creative territory. Today we'll be focusing on the latest updates with Jonathan's demo album and the big return to Second Story rehearsals.
Yes.
So we'll begin with the album.
Sure.
And very interesting discussions between John and myself this week with regard to the album's overall themes and concepts. And in discussing them, we realized that there isn't a classic narrative arc in terms of story and plot per se, but the album is really more of an exploration of a character's emotional landscape and development. The character is wrestling with powerful emotions, deep, intense, complex, and struggling with core identity issues. So when John was thinking about taking what we call the seventh song, the most recent one that he wrote, and adding it to the album, we realized that it in fact fits beautifully from an emotional journey standpoint and a musical arc standpoint, and he didn't have the pressure of having to have it fit into a very defined storyline. So I think that was a pretty good find, because I think you felt more secure about the fact that it did work.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. And I like that it tips the balance just a little bit more to the kind of industrial dance sound of some of the other songs. So it gives the listener another chance to groove a little bit, but also explore kind of a very dark, I think it's the darkest song on the album, actually.
And that's saying something.
But yeah, I mean, all the songs have a darkness to them, and some of them are, are the heart on your sleeve type of dark, where you're just going, this is how I feel. But this one is like, a growling. I mean, it's quite literally about a man who relates himself to a beast, and it's all these metaphors about being a beast. But this is definitely a night-dwelling creature, and the sound is very night-ish, and there's very little air. There's very little light. There's practically no light in this song. So, it'll appeal to the more goth-driven sensibilities of our listeners. I hope you enjoy it when you finally hear it.
But certainly thematically, it's a perfect fit. And so that's exciting news. That worked. John, you were also contemplating another decision with regard to the album, and one song in particular, whose name I finally am remembering, One Mistake. John was talking about possibly making a substitution, taking a new verse he had written and substituting it for one that already exists in the song. Now, this new verse is about police brutality and racism. And John was wondering, is this a good choice? Might it be too soon after the actual incident that John is writing about? So, John, I was wondering if you would talk about the highlights of the discussion that you and I had when we were considering whether this change made sense, and what some of the concerns were and what we ultimately worked through.
Yeah. To recap quickly, we talked about this on a previous video cast, what this song is about, but each verse talks about a different person throughout history. Some are of modern contemporary history, some are of some of ancient history, I suppose. But all people who were, in a sense, martyred, some who were victims, and some who were leaders who put themselves out there. Not that they should have been killed, but but they put themselves out in the line of fire for causes they believe in. Others were, like I said, were people who were just living the life that they chose to live, but were killed for various reasons relating to their identity. And so when you say it was a new verse, it's actually one of the original verses, but it's sort of come back in my mind, because of course I wrote many more verses, but selected, I think, 6 to include in the song. And one thing that I shared with you, and we had talked a little bit back and forth about, was selecting a variety of examples.
Right.
What I mentioned, some were victims, some were, obviously they were all victims, but some were casual victims, I guess, innocent bystander type victims. Others were people who put themselves out there. And each one is different in its own way. So I'm sort of touching upon different categories. Some were killed for religious beliefs, some were killed for race, because of a hate crime. Others were killed for hate crimes against their sexuality, things like that. So I'm trying to, touch as many different examples as I can.
Right.
So the question about should I put this other verse in, I kind of thought it would be interesting to see how it would feel if I again talk about tipping the balance, tip the balance a little bit more to talk about people who were just trying to live their lives as who they are, but then were victims of racism or hate or things like that. Would that make the song more impactful, more powerful? Because the choruses talk about trying to be yourself and being afraid to be yourself, and being afraid of putting yourself out there and then making a mistake, whatever that means, and being punished or condemned for it. So I kind of thought, would it be interesting to have one more, sort of innocent victim in there. But I'm not sure exactly. I mean, and you sort of supported the idea of having truly a variety. I do talk about race in one or two of the other verses already, verses already.
Yes.
So it's kind of like, okay, well then would it be all about race and not about these other things? So it's this bizarre balance. There's a lot to consider. Right, and ultimately, does it make a difference, or is the impact of the song there with the 6 that I've selected already? So that's kind of where I am now. I'm juggling that.
One of the things we did talk about was what came into my mind right away was asking John, is this particularly meaningful to you? This is your song. So if this incident and its message mean a lot to you, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, first of
Yeah.
all, I mean, after all, this is your work of art.
Right.
So,
Right.
if it speaks to you first and foremost, my feeling was
Yeah.
that should play a big part in the
Well,
decision.
and they all speak to me. So we'll see.
So we'll see.
We'll see which one pokes me the hardest in the back of the head, and I go, fine, you win. You get to be in the song.
Exactly. But I can tell you they're all, without exception, wonderful. So in this case, you can't miss, truly.
Well, thank you.
And a couple of other notes. Jonathan does want to do a bit more sound mixing with the different songs on the album before he's ready to release it in its raw state. And he's considering different platforms and organizations through which the song could potentially be released. And we're still wrestling with strategic decisions with regard to releasing the album as a whole versus in its individual song components. So stay tuned as we work through some of these technical and strategic issues, and we'll let you know what's going on. But speaking of what's going on, the big news of the day today, September 12th, is that we at Second Story resumed rehearsals after our summer hiatus.
It was so nice.
And in fact, leading into today's rehearsal, Jonathan had sent Lorena and Mandy a video of Brittle Branches for them to review so that they could come into this first rehearsal of the season having had that opportunity to refresh their memories. And John, I know you had excuse me, spoken about wanting to discuss your ideas about makeup and costumes for the Brittle Branches performance with the Steffi Nossen showcase. So those were really the two pieces that John had on his mind coming in to rehearsal. And when we arrived, it was really like a wonderful reunion.
Yeah, it was.
Catching up with one another about our summer exploits and what I call the kitty updates and developmental milestones and news. And of course, this being Second Story, sharing advice with one another on your favorite parental topic and mine, setting limits. So we knew we were back in the Second Story environment at that point. But we kicked off our return to Second Story with quite a wallop of an external challenge, as we call it in the creative process. And that is that Lorena announced that she has agreed to become a partner in a wonderful business venture that will require her full-time focus. And of course, we were thrilled for her, but we had to really start to take a step back as a team and think about the implications of this development on Second Story. It's very possible that after the November show that Lorena will not be able to join us any longer. And we had to figure out alternate rehearsal times and locations during this next month and a half that work with Lorena's schedule so that Lorena and Mandy feel prepared for the November 10th performance. We also have another event that we have spoken about with you in December, the Art Life event sponsored by the Mamaroneck Arts Council. So we're now going to have to rethink that as well, and decide how to move forward. So, John, big announcement, potential big changes ahead.
Sure.
What are your preliminary thoughts and feelings?
I was not surprised at all by the news. It's something Lori had mentioned to me before. There were some, not to get into her business, there were some exciting new aspects of it, but I knew this general idea of a direction for her was coming. And I don't know, so I think I was kind of prepared to hear that. And then it just kind of came down to brainstorming, and to immediately you sort of declaring like, well, we still want to go forward with the performances, and we want you to be included, Lori, and let's just figure out what we need to do to have that happen. And if this then is sort of the way we wrap up our time together, beautiful, then we'll do it in an accommodating and joyful way. Or if this is perhaps a new twist and launches us into a new direction, with Lori still able to be a part of what we do, great. Then it really is just, reconfiguring our operating based on the new set of circumstances.
Exactly.
Also, because if we just stuck to the way we had been working, no, this wouldn't necessarily be a good fit. But immediately Mandy and I were expressed our openness to perhaps shifting the rehearsal schedule around, finding different day, finding different times, finding different location. That works for everybody. It has to work for everybody.
Sure.
And also the fact that when we can also be flexible week to week, that it doesn't have to be the same meeting time every week anymore. For a while that was kind of important, and that's just sort of was our anchor. But now the anchor is the show, so we do whatever it takes to get to the show.
Right. Good point.
So, and once we all kind of got on that wavelength, immediately possibilities opened up, and suddenly everybody felt good again. I think Lori was, a little sad to sort of, she was happy with the news, but also sad that this might mean her not being able to continue with us. But immediately I saw her feel better about it, and we all got excited, and we're able to, we'll be fine. We'll reconfigure, and again, and we'll see what this means for the future. She obviously will be busy anew with this new direction she's going in her life. But who knows? We'll see. With this new flexibility, maybe a new day will work for her, and if she's inspired to continue to have a little drop of dance still in her life, then she's welcome.
So once again, stay tuned as we stick with this unfolding story. Meanwhile, Eliza was in the house today.
Yes, my little girl.
Given that the first couple weeks of September usually for preschools are a little wonky, she only had 1 hour of preschool today, so she was joining us.
It was her first day of threes class.
Of three, the big threes.
Big threes.
Very exciting.
And she did very, very well. She loved it.
That's great. And her enthusiasm carried over into the studio.
She just ran back and forth.
Absolutely. Nonstop. Pretty much.
A good hour, I think, was that. And then there was drawing, and then there was all the other stuff.
Oh, yeah. It was, she had a great time, especially diving and wedging herself between John's legs during warm-up and reminding us of the good old days.
Yeah, it had been a while. It had been a long time, and there I was, like doing my class and teaching the warm up, and she was just diving in and out and trying to hold onto my leg as I'm moving, and it was a little nostalgic moment of, oh, we haven't done this in so long, and it had been a while because of her school schedule. She wasn't coming to rehearsals
That's
for
right.
a long while there, but there she was. It was kind of really fun for me. I didn't mind it at all. I was like, oh,
This is kind of cute as
it
long
was
as
novel.
it happens. It was a novel. As long as it's 2 or 3 times a year, no problem. But funnily enough, my instincts kicked in
Yes, you
to
were very helpful.
give John as much uninterrupted time as possible. So I lured her over for some drawing projects and made good on my promise to chase her all over the room, which she just loved. So that worked out very well. And then Mandy choreographed a new phrase and taught it to John and Lorena. And then they did an across the floor segment. And during this period of time, I'm watching Jonathan's face, and he's just beaming. So that
I don't even. I mean, I feel it, but I don't realize that I'm glowing at this moment.
yes, he was.
Until you mention it.
Yeah, it was just very obvious to me. So perhaps needlessly, I'll ask this question: how did you feel being back in the studio with Lori and Mandy?
It was so much fun. It was really great. It was like old times. It was, two of my great friends. Suddenly, there they were to greet me as I walked through the door, and with big hugs, and yeah, and like you said, immediately we got to chatting and to catching up, and then bragging about our kids and venting about our kids, of course, but and then the dancing was just so much fun, and it was kind of nice because I think because we did take some time to sit and chat for a while. Then when it was time to move, it was really like, okay, well, let's just let's go, let's roll, let's warm up quick so we can review quick. We don't have a lot of time, which was kind of the perfect pace. And I just there was very little discussion about what to do. I just said, look, I'm going to do my class. I've been teaching. I'm back at Purchase now. So I was like, let me just take you through my class quickly. We'll do the abbreviated version. And then I said, now Mandy, give us an adagio phrase, a slow phrase. And then we just jumped around. And so it was very free. It was very just don't think, move, which is the best. Dancers love to turn off their brains and move. There's a lot of brain work involved, but when you can finally turn off your brain and just execute the dance, it's heaven. So I think there was some of that happening.
Well, that's probably a good thing that we had some of that, because we then moved on to Brittle Branch's run through. And of course, John took out his pen and paper to make notes. And it turned out that Mandy and Lorena forgot small pieces here, bigger chunks there of the choreography, because they haven't worked with this material in at least, I guess, 2.5 months. So upon completion of the run through, Mandy and Lorena targeted what I'll call some of the holes to verbally talk through together to reconstruct the choreography, especially, for example, in one of the entwined sequences where the movements are quite intricate. So I was wondering, John, did you expect that it would take a little time for the ladies to remember the choreography? And do you think maybe the next couple of rehearsals will really need to be dedicated to sort of reconstructing that memory, and then you can work on the qualitative details with the time you have left?
Yes.
Oh,
All of
there's
that.
okay.
Yeah, I expected today to just be getting it back,
Okay.
and just getting the skeleton back. Whether they had time to look at the video or not, it's still, there's still work. They still have to then touch each other and intertwine their bodies and do all that, and all of that takes some bumping around and reconfiguring. And oh right, you had to step there for me to in order to step there. Like there's all that little stuff going on.
Sure.
And any first day back is going to have that. And reviewing is very important on your own, but then there's always still that review time that you need
Right.
in the studio itself. So yeah, I figured today that that's what we were facing, and that's pretty much what we had. We didn't have. I maybe would have liked to have gotten one more run through once they had put all the pieces together, but again, it was all time well spent. So I was pleased with the day, and I think now that we have a show date, it's clear that this piece is now the priority over these rehearsals. They now know, the beast has been reconstructed, it's been put back together, so now they just need to stay on top of that. So I predict rehearsals will now progress pretty steadily from there. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Well, speaking of predictions, that brings me to my final question of the evening. When you were first thinking about potential outcomes of the hiatus, when we spoke back in June, I asked you to predict what you thought might occur upon reuniting. And a couple of the things that you talked about were coming back feeling refreshed, excited to work with your colleagues again, and perhaps even coming in with some new ideas. So today was that first day back. How did the experience today compare with what you were imagining back in June?
It's kind of, it's almost exactly what I expected. And maybe that's just me knowing these guys so well, and knowing myself, and knowing sort of the nature of the art form well at this point. But still experiencing it was wonderful. It was like the surprises of each momentary nuance was still a delightful, it was just lovely. So even if I could have told you, yeah, we'll probably spend like 20 minutes chatting, and then we'll kind of bump around and decide how to warm up, and then we'll do it, and then we'll put on the music and review, and they'll probably be these forgetful moments that they have to go over, and then inevitably the time will end, and we'll be like, oh, it's time to go, like all of that.
Ding, ding, ding.
Of course, but and it will be great to reunite, like all of that. But it was all just super fun to actually get to do. It's like just because it was predictable doesn't mean it was not wonderful.
Well, the good news actually is that one of the things we had spoken about in June, one possible outcome of any type of hiatus is that people could conclude that in fact they do not wish to move forward. So that certainly is always a possibility. So it's kind of nice that that everything did work out so beautifully and to everybody's delight and satisfaction, and did fit that very optimistic prediction several months ago. And I think this was a very and re-energizing time for all three of you this summer. And I think we saw the afterglow, if you will, of those respective experiences in rehearsal today, and it certainly was a pleasure for me.
I just remember all of us as we were, individually saying goodbye to each other, just commenting on how fun the day was. And I remember specifically Mandy and Lori just giving each other a hug and a kiss and going, "That was really fun." And
I was like, "Oh,
it was really fun."
Absolutely. And I guess the final thought that just came in my mind is, so we're really seeing how much fun and pleasure you can derive from multiple creative endeavors simultaneously. Again, those creative balls, foreground, background, whatever way they happen to be configured, you are really feeding yourself under all of those circumstances. And it was certainly a delight for me today to see that clearly you were fed once again today. And hey, let's hope this continues. For certain, that's something, of course, we all need and want. And thank you, John, for sort of showing us the way, if you will, or one possible way, which lets us know it is indeed possible.
Yes.
So we thank you for joining us this evening and look forward to spending our next video cast with you. Take care.